Pierce Brosnan is often remembered through the polished image of James Bond, the tuxedo, the composure, the effortless control under pressure. Yet beneath that public silhouette lies a life marked by repetition of absence, loss, and the slow learning of how to remain standing when certainty is repeatedly withdrawn. His story is not one of sudden transformation but of accumulation, of moments that quietly reshape how a person understands attachment, identity, and endurance. From early childhood through adulthood, the pattern that follows him is not triumph alone, but the recurring experience of people disappearing, of stability dissolving without warning, and of having to continue anyway. What emerges is not a narrative of invincibility but of adaptation, a man repeatedly forced to rebuild meaning after it has been stripped away. The contrast between public perception and private reality becomes central. While audiences see precision and control, the deeper thread is survival through emotional discontinuity. Each phase of his life, childhood, early ambition, professional uncertainty, fame, and personal tragedy, adds another layer to this internal architecture. The result is not a seamless rise but a life held together through endurance rather than certainty, where strength is not defined by dominance but by the ability to remain present in the aftermath of loss. Childhood in Ireland and the formation of silence. Born in Drogheda, Ireland, Brosnan entered a world where stability was already fractured. His father left early, leaving no meaningful memory behind, only absence where presence might have been. His mother later departed to work in London, leaving him in the care of relatives for years at a time. These early separations were not dramatic events in the traditional sense. They were quieter, more persistent, and therefore more formative. He moved between homes, never staying long enough for any place to fully register as permanent. In that instability, he learned early that attachment could not be relied upon as a constant. The psychological effect was not outward rebellion but inward adaptation. He became observant, quiet, and self-contained, learning to occupy space without expecting continuity from it. Childhood, for him, was less a period of growth in safety than a prolonged exercise in adjusting to interruption. Even ordinary moments carried the expectation of eventual departure. This environment shaped a kind of emotional restraint that would later be mistaken for natural composure. In reality, it was a learned response to unpredictability. The absence of his parents did not become a single wound but a structure through which he began to interpret the world, one where connection existed but never guaranteed its own survival. Early artistic instincts and the turn toward performance. As adolescence gave way to young adulthood, Brosnan initially gravitated toward visual art rather than performance. He studied painting in London, attempting to build a future through image and composition rather than voice or presence. Yet even in this phase, there was an underlying instability. Life in London was financially precarious, and certainty about direction remained elusive. The shift toward acting did not arrive as a planned decision, but as an encounter with possibility. A workshop experience introduced him to performance in a way that bypassed deliberation. He stepped into it not because he had mapped a career path, but because something in him responded to the immediacy of presence and expression. Acting revealed a different relationship to control. Not control over outcomes, but control over attention, timing, and emotional precision. Training at the Drama Centre London intensified this shift. It was demanding, often unforgiving, and required persistence rather than talent alone. Many left, but he remained, not out of certainty but endurance. What emerged was a developing capacity to inhabit roles with a calm exterior that masked internal effort. Even in early performances, there was a sense of contained intensity, as though emotional expression was being carefully filtered through discipline rather than spontaneity. Early career struggle and the architecture of persistence. The early years of acting work were defined by fragmentation, small roles, brief appearances, and uncertain continuity. There was no immediate breakthrough, only incremental exposure to an industry that rewarded visibility but rarely guaranteed it. Each role carried the implication that it might not lead to another. This period reinforced a pattern already familiar from childhood, the need to continue without assurance of continuity. He worked across theater and minor screen roles, gradually building recognition, but without the stability of sustained success. What distinguished this phase was not external achievement but internal consistency. He continued working regardless of scale, treating each opportunity as temporary but necessary. The absence of guarantees shaped a professional discipline rooted in adaptability. Rather than waiting for permanence, he learned to function within impermanence. This would later become central to his screen presence, an ability to appear composed in situations where the character, and sometimes the production itself, was under pressure. The foundation of his career was therefore not sudden visibility, but accumulated resilience. Each small role added not to fame, but to endurance, reinforcing a professional identity built on continuation rather than arrival. Remington Steele, Bond Expectations, and Deferred Arrival. The television series that would later elevate his profile introduced both opportunity and complication. It placed him in the public eye, and simultaneously aligned him with an expectation he had not yet fully earned. James Bond. The resemblance in tone and presence created speculation, but timing disrupted progression. Contractual obligations prevented him from stepping into the Bond role when it first became available, and the opportunity passed to another actor. This moment established a pattern of near arrival followed by delay. Success was visible but not secured. Recognition existed alongside postponement. Even as his popularity grew through television, the Bond Association followed him like a shadow of potential rather than completion. The industry perception of him as a future Bond created pressure without resolution. For years he occupied a space of anticipation, publicly linked to a role that remained just out of reach. This period tested patience more than ambition. It required continuing forward while carrying an identity not yet fulfilled. The experience reinforced a professional paradox, being recognized for a role not yet held, and preparing for an opportunity that repeatedly shifted shape before arriving. GoldenEye and the burden of becoming Bond. When the Bond role finally arrived through GoldenEye, it did not feel like sudden transformation but delayed convergence. Years of speculation, interruption, and expectation condensed into a single responsibility. The success of the film restored the franchise's global relevance and positioned him as its renewed face. Yet the experience was not simply one of arrival, it was also one of containment. The role demanded consistency at a global scale, where personal identity became closely tied to public expectation. Success brought recognition, but also a narrowing of perception. Over multiple films, he embodied the character through physical precision and controlled expression, reinforcing the image of composure under pressure. However, beneath the surface, the role carried the weight of long anticipation finally resolved into obligation. The discipline required to maintain it was significant, but so was the subtle cost of being defined by it. Even as the films achieved commercial success, there remained an undercurrent of awareness that identity and role were becoming difficult to separate. The culmination of years of waiting became not just fulfillment but permanence, and permanence, in this context, carried its own form of pressure. Partnership, illness, and the first collapse of continuity. His marriage to Cassandra Harris introduced a period of emotional grounding that contrasted sharply with earlier instability. It represented the first sustained sense of family continuity rather than intermittent attachment. Together, they built a life that included children and shared responsibility, offering a structure that felt more enduring than anything previously experienced. This stability, however, was disrupted by illness. Cassandra's diagnosis of ovarian cancer transformed domestic life into cycles of treatment, uncertainty, and gradual decline. Over several years, the family moved through hospitals, recovery attempts, and repeated setbacks. The experience was not defined by a single moment of crisis but by extended exposure to fragility. He remained present throughout, supporting both emotional and practical needs, while witnessing gradual deterioration. Her eventual passing marked a decisive rupture. It did not simply end a relationship, it altered the internal sense of time and permanence. The household that had once represented stability became a space shaped by memory and absence. What followed was not collapse in the dramatic sense, but a quiet reconfiguration of life around loss that could no longer be reversed. Repetition of illness and the loss of a daughter, years later, the same illness returned within his family through his daughter Charlotte. The recurrence carried an additional weight precisely because it echoed what had already been endured. Medical treatments, long periods of uncertainty, and gradual decline mirrored earlier experiences, creating a sense of repetition that felt both familiar and unbearable. Charlotte's approach to illness reflected determination, but also awareness of limited outcomes. The presence of children within this period added another layer of emotional complexity, extending the impact of illness beyond the individual to the next generation. As before, the experience unfolded over time rather than in a single event, shaping daily life through anticipation and gradual change. Her passing reinforced a pattern that had already marked his life, loss returning in altered form but similar structure. It deepened the sense that certain experiences do not resolve but recur, not as repetition of events but as repetition of emotional architecture. The effect was cumulative rather than isolated, adding to a life already shaped by multiple encounters with irreversible absence. Christopher and the slow disappearance through addiction. The experience with his son Christopher unfolded differently, not through illness but through gradual disconnection shaped by addiction. Unlike previous losses defined by physical decline, this one was marked by absence within presence, moments where proximity remained but connection weakened. The progression was not abrupt but incremental, characterized by periods of distance, instability, and partial return. Efforts to support recovery included intervention, patience, and continued engagement, but outcomes remained uncertain. What made this form of loss distinct was its lack of closure. There was no single moment of departure, only diminishing accessibility over time. The emotional reality required a different kind of endurance, remaining present without the assurance that presence would be recognized or sustained. It reflected a shift from grieving absence to enduring ambiguity. Love persisted, but it existed alongside recognition of limits. The experience did not end in resolution but in ongoing complexity, where relationship and distance coexisted without reconciliation. It became another variation of a familiar pattern. Connection that cannot be fully maintained, yet cannot be fully relinquished. Departure from Bond and professional displacement. The end of his tenure as Bond arrived not through narrative conclusion but through a brief and final communication. After years of association with the role, the decision to replace him was delivered without transition. The timing intensified the experience, as it coincided with a period in which the franchise itself was evolving in a different direction. The shift did not only remove a role but also redefined his professional identity in public perception. Projects changed, opportunities narrowed, and the association with Bond became both legacy and limitation. The experience reflected a broader pattern of interruption that had appeared throughout his life, moments of continuity ending without gradual closure, yet the response remained consistent with earlier patterns, continuation rather than withdrawal. He moved into other work, adapting to a changed professional landscape while carrying the residual identity of a role that had defined an era. The transition illustrated the complexity of long-term association with a single character, success that becomes permanence, and permanence that eventually becomes constraint. Endurance as a form of identity. Across the entirety of his life, what emerges is not a narrative defined by singular triumph or defeat, but by sustained endurance through recurring disruption. Early abandonment, professional uncertainty, profound personal loss, and shifting identity all contribute to a pattern in which stability is repeatedly formed and then altered. Rather than resolving these experiences into closure, his life reflects coexistence with them. The public image of composure aligns with private necessity rather than superficial performance. Endurance becomes less a trait and more a condition of existence, shaped by repeated exposure to change without warning. In this sense, strength is not defined by resistance to loss, but by continued presence within it. Each phase of life adds another layer to this structure, reinforcing a capacity to remain steady even when certainty is absent. What persists is not untouched resilience but lived continuity through disruption. The story ultimately reflects a life shaped less by what was achieved than by what had to be carried, and the ongoing ability to remain present within that weight.